I'm Ken Lammas. I'm an auctioneer. I'm not a conventionally educated man. I ran off to the south of France at the age of 15, found work on a luxury yacht, only for my parents to drag me back after 3 months. Having tasted the lifestyle, I returned to France a year or so later. I discovered my calling as an international playboy. Unfortunately, I was probably 4 inches too short, probably not pretty enough, and lacked the all-important trust fund that many of my new acquaintances relied on. I eventually returned back to England. I became an auctioneer over 30 years ago, more by accident than design. Within 5 years, I'd secured a large share of my company. Since then, my company has acted on behalf of the Metropolitan Police, Customs and Excise, Inland Revenue, the Combined Agency of Revenue and Customs, National Bailiff Companies, various county courts and insolvency practitioners. Over the years, the laws of distraint have governed many of the organisations and companies that I've acted for. On the 6th of April this year, the new Taking Control of Goods regulations came into force. The laws of distraint were abolished, along with some 800 years of case law, precedents, rulings and interpretations dating back to the Magna Carta. Experts on the previous legislation have now become just mere speculators as to the effects of the new system and having to find their way in the dark without the protection of established law. In theory, the Taking Control of Goods Act has simplified the process, levelling the playing fields between the debtor and debtee, eradicating the bully boys and the cowboys, by doing so turning the whole industry into a far more politically correct entity. Bailiffs now are banished to a soon forgotten past, and the new enforcement agent has ridden into town on his gleaming white steed, followed by a bevy of new sheriffs. He says going back. However, these newly named teams of debt heroes have a very tough time ahead. The Ministry of Justice has not just changed or amended paragraph 4.3 and 10.9 of a 10,000-page document, they have torn up the book, burnt the library and turned off the Google search. The new enforcement agencies are not only having to have new business cards printed, but also years of professional processes, systems, protocols have now had to be abandoned. Computer programs need to be rebuilt from the conception stage, management staff have to be retrained, new systems have to be put into place, tested and verified. Every document and form will have to be rewritten, all of this while convincing clients who are going through the same process to carry on issuing the instructions required to generate the funding needed to facilitate the change. It may appear to the outsider that the debt collection industry is ill-prepared and that it should have been a seamless integration into the new legislation. However, the government and the Ministry of Justice have made this virtually impossible. Successive governments have discussed, pushed, abandoned, delayed, revisited, forgotten and rekindled the amendments to this legislation for many years. Only 3 weeks prior to the April the 6th deadline, a county court judge stated he could never see it happening. At a recent Civil Enforcement Association conference, the Ministry of Justice could not provide a concrete interpretation of the new law or even copies of the replacement documentation required to enforce the collection of a debt. Most questions tabled to the Ministry of Justice during this conference were answered with, "This has not been finalised at this point, but I can assure you it will be clarified by the 6th of April. Up until yesterday, there had still been no guidelines given to the procedure needed to train an enforcement officer, which he should have had 2 months ago. I'm not here to point political blame or mock the Ministry of Justice. Something needed to be done, but I'm not sure that pushing the whole lot off a cliff into the sea and see what floats scenario was quite the right way to go. However, whether it's change for change's sake or for the better, the new regulations came into force on the 6th of April 2014. What does this mean for you and your clients? Many of you will represent commercial landowners, commercial landlords, or commercial tenants. All of your companies or employers will be one or the other. The cement of these relationships is rent. Under the old distress for rent legislation, the landlord was the lord, able to gain entry with the slightest indiscretion of the tenant, seizing goods regardless of ownership and without the need of a court order, and then disposing of said goods without true accountability. The balance of power has now shifted. This sector is now governed by part of the new legislation, which is actually named Commercial Rent Arrears Recovery. In the age of the acronym, it's commonly known as CRAR. Many of you will also represent clients who may be getting into financial difficulty. These clients are liable to be in arrears with HMRC, the PAYE, non-domestic rates and other trade debts, all of which now are under the umbrella of the new Taking Control of Good regulations. These regulations have changed the speed and urgency of the action which will be taken by the agencies in order to recover their debts. It seems that the whole of the new legislation has been guided more towards HMRC and other government agencies. I'm not going to attempt to explain the regulations, as I do not have a 4-hour slot, and frankly I do not want to put you all to sleep. However, I am going to impress on you the importance and urgency of obtaining up-to-date professional advice in what will be a turbulent and ever-evolving period for this infant legislation. Looking to the future, I can only hope in whatever your profession, you are not subject to such sweeping reforms as those being experienced by the debt collecting industry and its associated contractors. Thank you for listening.